The fog rolled across the English Channel like a shroud of destiny on the morning of June 6, 1944. General Dwight David Eisenhower stood at the window of Southwick House, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he watched the largest armada in human history disappear into the gray dawn. Behind him, the final preparations for Operation Overlord continued with mechanical precision. But the weight of decision had already been made. The fate of Europe now rested in the hands of 156,000 Allied soldiers, crossing treacherous waters toward the beaches of Normandy. The deception had been months in the making. Operation Fortitude, the elaborate ruse designed to convince the Germans that the invasion would come at pas de delay, had worked beyond their wildest expectations. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the desert fox himself, had fallen for the Phantom, 1st United States Army Group commanded by General George Smith Patton, Jr. Inflatable tanks, fake radio traffic, and double agents had painted a picture of Allied strength concentrated 150 miles northeast of the actual landing sites. As the real invasion fleet approached the Norman coast, German panzer divisions remained frozen in place, waiting for an attack that would never come. Admiral Bertram Ramsay's naval forces had achieved the impossible, moving the equivalent of a small city across the channel undetected. The floating harbors of Mulberry, prefabricated ports that would be towed across the water and assembled off the invasion beaches, represented engineering brilliance born of necessity. Without capturing an intact port, the invasion would fail within days. The Germans knew this, which made the Mulberry Project one of the war's best-kept secrets. According to military historian Stephen Ambrose's detailed account in D-Day, June 6, 1944, the complexity of coordinating naval, air, and ground forces for Operation Overlord exceeded any military operation in history. Air Marshal Trafford Leigh-Mallory's bombers had spent weeks softening German defenses, targeting not just the Atlantic Wall, but transportation networks throughout occupied France. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of European skies, had been reduced to fewer than 300 operational aircraft in the entire region. Meanwhile, Allied air forces could field over 13,000 planes. This overwhelming superiority would prove crucial in the hours ahead, but statistics and superior numbers meant nothing to Private First Class Robert Sullivan of the 116th Infantry Regiment as his landing craft pitched through 6-foot swells toward Omaha Beach. The 19-year-old from Nebraska clutched his rifle with white knuckles, knowing that within minutes he would either be advancing up that terrible beach or lying dead in the surf. Around him, 36 other soldiers shared the same terrifying thoughts. Their faces green from seasickness and fear. The German 7th Army, commanded by Colonel General Friedrich Dollmann, remained largely in their bunkers as the invasion fleet approached. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, overall commander of German forces in the West, still believed the Normandy landings were a diversion. Even as the first shells began falling on German positions, the High Command hesitated to commit their reserves. This fatal indecision would cost them dearly in the crucial first hours of the invasion. The ramp of landing craft infantry 523 dropped at exactly 0630 hours, and hell erupted on Omaha Beach. Machine gun fire from German positions atop the bluffs cut through the morning air like deadly hail, finding targets among the soldiers of the 29th Infantry Division. Before they could take 3 steps in the surf, Private Sullivan threw himself behind a steel beach obstacle, salt water and sand filling his mouth as bullets whined overhead. The carefully planned assault was disintegrating into chaos. Strong currents had pushed many landing craft off course, delivering troops far from their intended sectors. The preliminary naval bombardment, which was supposed to neutralize German defenses, had been lifted too early to avoid hitting the incoming infantry. As a result, the German 3rd and 2nd Fortress Machine Gun Battalion, positioned in concrete bunkers along the bluff, remained largely intact and devastatingly effective. Colonel Charles Canham of the 116th Infantry Regiment waded through the surf with a bullet hole in his wrist, shouting orders that could barely be heard above the din of battle. "Get off this beach, or you're going to die here," he bellowed as soldiers huddled behind obstacles. The colonel's words would become legendary, but at that moment, they seemed like an impossible command. The beach was a killing field, littered with abandoned equipment and motionless forms in the crimson surf. Rangers from the 2nd Battalion, led by Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder, faced an equally daunting task at Point du Hoc. Their mission: scale 100-foot cliffs under enemy fire to silence German artillery. that could devastate both Utah and Omaha beaches. Using rocket-fired grappling hooks and rope ladders, these elite soldiers began their vertical assault, while German defenders dropped hand grenades from above. Many Rangers fell before reaching the cliff face, but others pressed on with grim determination. Military historian John Keegan, in his comprehensive work The Second World War, noted that the casualties sustained in the First Hour at Omaha Beach nearly caused Allied commanders to consider evacuation. The German resistance was fierce but fatally flawed. Lieutenant General Dietrich Krase, commanding the 352nd Infantry Division defending Omaha, had positioned his forces well for the initial slaughter. However, the German defensive plan relied on repelling the invasion. At the water's edge, once Allied forces gained even minimal footing on the beach, the static nature of German fortifications became a liability. Sergeant Frank Draper Jr. of the 116th Infantry found himself in command of 40 men after his platoon leader fell wounded. With no officers left alive in his sector, the 24-year-old squad leader made a decision that would alter the course of the battle. Instead of remaining pinned down behind the seawall, he led a desperate charge up the bluff between two German strongpoints. His example sparked similar actions along the beach as small groups of soldiers, leaderless but not hopeless, began to move inland. The naval fire support that had seemed inadequate during the initial assault now proved its worth. Destroyer Satterlee, commanded by Captain Lorenzo Sabin, close to within 800 yards of the beach, risking mines and short batteries to provide direct fire support. For the struggling infantry, other destroyers followed suit, their 5-inch guns systematically destroying German positions that had seemed invulnerable from the sea. By noon, tenuous footholds had been established on the bluff. The cost had been enormous, over 1,000 casualties on Omaha Beach alone, but the Atlantic Wall had been breached. German reinforcements, still convinced that the main attack would come elsewhere, remained committed to defending Pas de Calais. The window of opportunity that Eisenhower had gambled everything to create was slowly beginning to open. As the sun reached its zenith on June 6th, the character of the battle began to shift dramatically across all 5 invasion beaches. While Omaha remained a bloody struggle, Utah Beach had achieved its objectives with remarkably light casualties. The 4th Infantry Division, led by Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the 56-year-old son of the former president, had landed over a mile south of their intended target due to strong currents. Roosevelt's decision to proceed inland from their actual position, rather than attempt to relocate, proved tactically brilliant. "We'll start the war from right here," Roosevelt had declared upon realizing their predicament. His walking stick pointed toward the German positions. His calm leadership under fire would earn him the Medal of Honor, though he would not live to receive it, dying of a heart attack 5 weeks later. The 4th Division quickly seized key causeways across the flooded areas behind Utah Beach, linking up with paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, who had been fighting isolated battles since the early morning hours. The British and Canadian sectors told a different story of methodical progress against determined resistance. On Gold Beach, the 50th Northumbrian Division, veterans of the North African Campaign, advanced steadily against the German 716th Infantry Division. Their experience in amphibious operations, gained during the Sicily and Italian campaigns, proved invaluable in coordinating infantry advances with supporting armor from the 8th Armored Brigade. As documented in Max Hastings' authoritative account Overlord, D-Day, and the Battle for Normandy, the British forces' tactical sophistication reflected hard-won lessons from 3 years of combined operations. Major John Howard's glider-borne coup de main party had already secured Pegasus Bridge in the pre-dawn hours, capturing this vital crossing over the Caen Canal intact. The 6th Airborne Division, commanded by Major General Richard Nelson Gale, established a protective eastern flank for the invasion. Despite being scattered across the Norman countryside by inaccurate drops, their seizure of key bridges and defensive positions prevented German armored reserves from launching immediate counterattacks against the vulnerable beachheads. On Juno Beach, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division faced some of the heaviest fortifications outside of Omaha. The town of Courseulles-sur-Mer bristled with concrete bunkers and artillery positions manned by the 716th Infantry Division. Canadian infantry, supported by Fort Garry Horse Sherman tanks, fought house to house through the seaside resort, clearing German strongpoints with flamethrowers and demolition charges. By afternoon, they had penetrated further inland than any other Allied force reaching within sight of their D-Day objective of Carpiquet airfield. The tactical situation at Sword Beach demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of the Allied plan. The 3rd British Infantry Division, spearheaded by the 1st Special Service Brigade under Brigadier Simon Fraser, Lord Lovett, advanced rapidly inland after securing the beach. Their objective was ambitious, the capture of Caen, a major transportation hub that would anchor the entire Allied beachhead. However, the German 21st Panzer Division, the only armored unit available for immediate counterattack, finally received permission to engage at mid-afternoon. Colonel Hermann von Oppeln-Brennakowski led his panzers in a desperate thrust toward the coast, briefly reaching the shoreline between Juno and Sword Beaches. For a terrifying moment, it appeared that German armor might split the Allied beachhead and roll up the invasion from the flank. However, the panzer attack lacked infantry support and came to late in the day. Allied naval gunfire and close air support quickly brought the German advance to a halt, destroying nearly half of the 21st Panzer's remaining tanks. As darkness approached, the Atlantic Wall lay in ruins. 6 years of construction, millions of tons of concrete, and elaborate defensive preparations had been overcome in a single day. The German 7th Army reported to higher headquarters that the situation is serious, a masterpiece of understatement that barely captured the magnitude of their defeat. Over 150,000 Allied soldiers were now ashore in Normandy, and more were arriving with each passing hour. The 48 hours following D-Day transformed the tentative Allied foothold into an irreversible strategic victory. While German commanders continued to debate whether Normandy represented the main Allied effort or an elaborate feint, Eisenhower's forces exploited every hour of enemy indecision. The artificial harbors of Mulberry were being towed across the channel, and within 72 hours, they would be pumping supplies ashore at a rate that exceeded the capacity of most established ports. Field Marshal Rommel, who had been visiting his wife in Germany for her birthday when the invasion began, raced back to his headquarters at La Roche-Guyon. The Desert Fox immediately grasped the magnitude of the Allied achievement and began reorganizing his defenses for the campaign ahead. However, the rigid German command structure, which required Hitler's personal approval for major troop movements, fatally delayed the deployment of panzer reserves from the 15th Army. The German High Command remained convinced that General Patton's Phantom, 1st United States Army Group, would launch the real invasion at Pas de Calais. Double Agent Garbo, a Spanish businessman named Juan Pujol Garcia, who had constructed an entire network of fictitious subagents, continued feeding false intelligence to his German handlers. His reports describing massive troop concentrations in southeastern England were believed without question, keeping 19 German divisions frozen in place while Normandy burned. Intelligence historian Ben McIntyre's research, detailed in Double Cross, the true story of the D-Day spies, reveals how the 20 Committee's double agents continued their deception operations. For weeks after the invasion, Lieutenant General Omar Nelson Bradley, commanding the 1st United States Army, pushed his forces inland with methodical determination. The hedgerow country of Normandy, with its ancient field boundaries topped by dense thickets and earthen banks, proved ideal for defense. German machine gun crews could cover every gap, while mortars and artillery found perfect concealment among the bocage. Each field became a miniature battlefield, requiring careful coordination between infantry, engineers, and armor to overcome determined resistance. The 2nd Armored Division, Hell on Wheels, discovered that their Sherman tanks were poorly suited for hedgerow fighting. The high silhouettes required to climb over the earthen banks exposed the Shermans vulnerable. Belly armored to German Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. Sergeant Curtis Cullen of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron devised a solution, welding steel teeth cut from German beach obstacles to the front of Sherman tanks, allowing them to punch through hedgerows rather than climb over them. This innovation, dubbed the Rhino modification, revolutionized Allied tactics in the bocage. The British 2nd Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Miles Christopher Dempsey, faced different challenges around Caen. Montgomery's plan called for British forces to attract German armor reserves while American forces broke out to the west. The ancient Norman city became the focal point of German defensive efforts, with the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Youth and Panzer Lehr Division concentrating in the area. These elite units, commanded by fanatical young officers, would defend every street and building with suicidal determination. The Luftwaffe's absence from the skies over Normandy became increasingly apparent as Allied tactical air support reached overwhelming proportions. The 9th Air Force's fighter bombers, primarily Republic P-47 Thunderbolts and North American P-51 Mustangs, operated with virtual impunity over the battlefield. German daylight movement became impossible, forcing supply convoys and troop movements to occur only under cover of darkness. This aerial superiority multiplied the effectiveness of Allied ground forces and prevented German commanders from concentrating their scattered reserves. By June 8th, the Allied beachhead stretched 40 miles along the Norman coast and penetrated up to 12 miles inland. Over 300,000 troops had been landed, along with 54,000 vehicles and 100,000 tons of supplies. The logistical miracle that made such numbers possible demonstrated Allied industrial and organizational superiority that Germany could never hope to match. The race for reinforcements was being won decisively by the Allies, setting the stage for the breakout battles that would liberate France. The ancient city of Caen became the anvil upon which German resistance in Normandy was hammered to pieces. During the brutal weeks following D-Day, Field Marshal Montgomery's strategy of attracting German armor reserves to the British sector, while American forces prepared for breakout operations, required the Second Army to fight a grinding battle of attrition against the Wehrmacht's finest units. The medieval streets and stone buildings of William the Conqueror's capital provided perfect defensive positions for determined German paratroopers and SS Panzer Grenadiers. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitler Youth, commanded by 33-year-old SS Oberfuhrer Kurt Meyer, defended Caen with fanatical intensity. These young soldiers, many of whom were Hitler Youth members who had volunteered for SS service, brought a terrifying combination of military skill and ideological fervor to the battle. Their Panzer IV tanks, camouflaged among the rubble of bombed buildings, turned every Allied advance into a costly assault against prepared positions. Operation Epsom, launched on June 26th, represented Montgomery's most ambitious attempt to encircle Caen from the west. The 15th Scottish Division, supported by the 11th Armored Division, attacked across the Odon River Valley in torrential rain that turned Norman fields into muddy quagmires. The weather was so severe that Allied air support was grounded, leaving British armor vulnerable to German anti-tank guns and Panzerfaust hidden in the hedgerows. Military historian Carlo D'Este's comprehensive analysis and decision in Normandy demonstrates how the Caen battles consumed German reserves that could have been used to contain the American breakout. General Heinrich Eberbach's Panzer Group West threw everything available into stopping the Scottish advance. The 2nd SS Panzer Corps, including the legendary 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, and the 12th SS Panzer Division, launched coordinated counterattacks that decimated British armored formations. The village of Villers-Bocage became synonymous with tank warfare after SS Obersturmführer Michael Whitman destroyed an entire British armored column single-handedly, knocking out 25 tanks and vehicles in 15 minutes. The deadlock around Caen forced Montgomery to resort to increasingly desperate measures. Operation Charnwood, beginning July 8th, commenced with the heaviest aerial bombardment ever directed against a single city. Over 400 Royal Air Force heavy bombers dropped 2,500 tons of explosives on Caen city center, reducing ancient churches and medieval buildings to rubble. The bombing created ideal defensive positions for German troops, while making Allied armor movement nearly impossible through the debris-choked streets. Canadian forces from the 3rd Infantry Division, supported by British armored units, finally fought their way into northern Caen after house-to-house combat that lasted 3 days. The Germans conducted a fighting withdrawal to the southern suburbs, destroying every bridge across the Orne River and leaving behind carefully prepared demolitions that turned rubble-filled streets into death traps. Each intersection required careful reconnaissance and often direct assault with flamethrowers and demolition charges. The human cost of the Caen battles was staggering. British and Canadian forces suffered over 40,000 casualties during the 6 weeks of fighting, while German losses in the sector exceeded 50,000. Entire villages disappeared from the map, obliterated by artillery barrages and aerial bombing. The Norman countryside, once pastoral farmland, became a moonscape of shell craters and destroyed vehicles that would take decades to restore. However, Montgomery's strategy was succeeding beyond his expectations. While British forces ground down German armor around Caen, American forces were quietly building up strength for Operation Cobra, the breakout offensive that would shatter German defenses in the west. 7 German panzer divisions were committed to holding Caen, leaving only scattered infantry units to face the growing American threat. The sacrifice of British and Canadian soldiers in the brutal urban warfare was buying time and space for the decisive blow to fall elsewhere. By mid-July, the remnants of the German 7th Army were exhausted and severely weakened. Ammunition shortages caused by constant Allied air attacks on supply lines forced artillery units to ration shells. Panzer divisions that had begun the Normandy campaign with over 100 tanks were reduced to company-strength battle groups. The Wehrmacht's defensive strategy was consuming its reserves faster than they could be replaced, setting the stage for the catastrophic collapse that would follow. The transformation of the Normandy campaign from bloody stalemate to spectacular breakthrough began at 1100 hours on July 25, 1944, where the largest tactical air bombardment in military history commenced over a 3-mile section of German lines west of Saint-Lô. Operation Cobra, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley's masterstroke, concentrated 1,500 heavy bombers, 400 medium bombers, and 500 fighter bombers against the remnants of Panzer-led division holding the crucial Saint-Lô road. The devastation was beyond anything previously witnessed on a battlefield. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzer-Lehr, reported that his division was bombed back to the Stone Age. Entire companies simply vanished under the avalanche of high explosives, while surviving soldiers emerged from their shelters in a state of complete shock. The carefully constructed German defensive line, anchored on the ancient hedgerows of the Bocage, ceased to exist as a coherent military position. However, the bombing was a double-edged sword that nearly destroyed the operation before it began. Short bombing by American aircraft killed 111 Allied soldiers, including Lieutenant General Leslie James McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in the European theater. The friendly fire incident temporarily shattered the confidence of assault troops, who were supposed to advance immediately behind the bombardment. For crucial hours, American infantry remained pinned in their foxholes, unsure whether the next wave of bombers would target German positions or their own. According to Russell Weekly's definitive account in Eisenhower's Lieutenants, the Cobra bombardment represented a watershed moment when tactical air power demonstrated its potential to completely reshape ground combat. Colonel James Batchelder's 8th Infantry Regiment finally began the ground assault at 1400 hours, advancing through the smoking ruins of what had been German defensive positions. The surviving elements of the 915th Infantry Regiment offered sporadic resistance, but most German soldiers were either dead, wounded, or too stunned to fight effectively. By nightfall, American forces had penetrated 3 miles into German territory, the deepest single-day advance since D-Day. The breakthrough came 24 hours later when Major General J. Lawton Collins' 7th Corps committed the 1st Infantry Division and the 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions to exploit the gap. The Big Red One, veterans of North Africa, Sicily, and Omaha Beach, spearheaded the advance with their customary aggressive determination. Behind them, Combat Command A of the 2nd Armored Division rolled through hedgerow country at unprecedented speed, their modified Sherman tanks equipped with Cullen hedgerow cutters slicing through bocage like a scythe through wheat. German resistance collapsed with stunning rapidity. The 7th Army, commanded by SS Oberstgruppenführer Paulhauser after the wounding of General Oberst Friedrich Dahlmann, could not contain the American advance with its shattered formations. Entire regiments surrendered en masse, while others simply melted away into the Norman countryside. The vaunted Atlantic Wall, which had taken for years to construct, was being overrun in a matter of hours. The strategic implications became apparent when Major General John Shirley Wood's 4th Armored Division captured Avranches on July 3rd or 1st, seizing the crucial gateway to Brittany in southern France. The narrow corridor through which American armor poured south represented one of the great strategic prizes of the war, access to the open country beyond the Norman Bocage. For the first time since D-Day, Allied mechanized forces could operate in terrain suited to rapid movement and maneuver warfare. Patton's 3rd Army, officially activated on August 1st, exploded through the Avranches Gap like water through a broken dam. The legendary cavalry officer, finally given the command he had craved since arriving in Normandy, unleashed his armored corps in a series of lightning advances that left German commanders completely bewildered. The 6th Armored Division reached Brest in 6 days of continuous movement, while the 4th Armored Division turned east toward the German rear areas, threatening to cut off the entire 7th Army. The German High Command, faced with complete tactical surprise, made one of the most catastrophic decisions of the war. Instead of ordering an immediate withdrawal from Normandy, Hitler commanded a counterattack toward Avranches, designed to cut off American spearheads and restore the situation. Operation Luttich would prove to be the Wehrmacht's death warrant in Normandy, offering Allied forces the opportunity to destroy German armies in the field, rather than pursue them across France. The German counteroffensive at Mortain on August 7, 1944, marked the beginning of the end for Wehrmacht forces in Normandy. Hitler's personal order to attack westward toward Avranches with 4 panzer divisions represented strategic madness born of desperation and delusion. Instead of conducting an orderly withdrawal to the Seine River, where defensive positions might have been established, the Führer committed his remaining armor reserves to a hopeless assault against prepared American positions. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich and the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler spearheaded the German attack in pre-dawn darkness, achieving initial surprise against elements of the 30th Infantry Division. However, American defensive preparations, guided by ultra-intelligence intercepts that had revealed German intentions, quickly contained the breakthrough attempts. The legendary Old Hickory Division, supported by tank destroyers and concentrated artillery fire, held their positions despite being temporarily cut off and surrounded. Lieutenant Colonel Abner Reeves' 2nd Battalion of the 120th Infantry Regiment became the symbol of American determination during the 6-day battle. Surrounded on Hill 3-1 for east of Mortain, these 500 soldiers held their position against repeated SS assaults, while calling in artillery fire on their own positions. Their radio communications, monitored by higher headquarters, provided a running commentary on one of the war's most desperate defensive actions. "We're still here, and the bastards haven't got us yet," became their unofficial motto. Stephen Ambrose's detailed research in Citizen Soldiers documents how the Mortain counterattack demonstrated the transformation of American forces from the uncertain troop who landed on D-Day into battle-hardened veterans, capable of matching elite German units. The failure of Operation Luttich created the strategic opportunity that Allied commanders had dreamed of since the beginning of the campaign. With German armor committed to the doomed offensive, Montgomery launched Operation Total Eyes on August 8, a carefully coordinated British and Canadian thrust toward Falaise, designed to link up with American forces driving north from Le Mans. The result would be a massive encirclement trapping the German 5th Panzer Army and 7th Army in a pocket between Falaise and Argentan. Polish General Stanisław Maciek's 1st Armored Division played a crucial role in closing the trap, fighting with particular ferocity against SS units that had participated in the destruction of Warsaw. The Polish tankers, many of whom had not seen their homeland since 1939, understood that this battle represented their contribution to eventual liberation. Their Cromwell tanks and Sherman Fireflies engaged German panzers in the rolling countryside south of Falaise, gradually tightening the noose around German forces trapped in the pocket. The horror inside the Falaise pocket defied description as Allied artillery and tactical aircraft pounded German columns trying to escape eastward. The Royal Air Force's 2nd Tactical Air Force and the 9th United States Air Force operated from dawn to dusk, destroying vehicles, supply columns, and anything that moved on the roads leading to the Seine. Rocket-firing Hawker Typhoons and Republic P-47 Thunderbolts turned German retreat into a massacre, creating traffic jams of destroyed vehicles that stretched for miles. Field Marshal Walter Model, who had assumed command of Army Group B after Rommel's wounding by Allied fighter bombers, ordered the evacuation of all remaining forces on August 16th. However, the narrow gap between Chambois and Trun, defended by Polish and Canadian forces, was barely wide enough for small groups of soldiers to slip through on foot. Most German vehicles, artillery pieces, and heavy equipment had to be abandoned in the pocket, representing an irreplaceable loss of material that the Wehrmacht could never make good. The final collapse came on August 21st, when the last German resistance in the Falaise pocket was eliminated. Over 50,000 German soldiers surrendered, while at least 10,000 were killed in the fighting. To complete armies had been destroyed as effective fighting formations, along with their equipment, vehicles, and irreplaceable experienced personnel. The road to Paris lay open, defended only by scattered remnants and hastily assembled fortress battalions. The Normandy campaign was over. From the desperate struggles on Omaha Beach to the final destruction in the Falaise pocket, 80 days of continuous combat had achieved what many military experts had thought impossible: the complete defeat of German forces in Western Europe. Through a single, sustained offensive operation, the liberation of France could now begin in earnest, as Allied armies raced toward the German frontier and the final victory that had seemed so distant on that foggy morning in June when the greatest armada in history crossed the English Channel to fulfill the promise of the Second Front.